So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a very big privilege for me to be here presenting for Reward Value. And I'm a corporate reporting intern. And before we get into discussing more of the sustainability reporting landscape in detail, I'd like to start off by providing a bit of an introduction and an excerpt from a speech done by Emmanuel Faber, who is the chair of the ISSB. And he spoke last month in London upon the release of the IFRS S1 and S2 sustainability standards. And he starts by saying that over time, we have learned that large, complex organizations have meant a lot more than what financial statements could communicate to shareholders. Take a simple example. Economics do not recognize nature. The price we pay and what we account for in the financial statements is not what it took for nature to create oil. What we pay for, what we account for, is the cost of exploring, of producing, transforming, distributing, and selling that oil in gas stations. But not a single penny is paid for the 55 million years of work by nature to make that into a fossil. We know they are fossils. We know we won't be able to replace them. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100 years, this will come to an end. We scarcely barely pay the price for water. Yes, we pay the price for water as businesses, but the real value of water we don't pay. The value that it may have the day that there isn't enough water for everyone. So it's quite clear that investing in the true value of nature and how to protect these ecosystems that are essential for our economic lives, for our ways of life as human beings, is critical for economics. And this is really a great how we start our presentation, because we know that we're in an era marked by increasing concern for the planet's well-being and societal progress, where the world has come to realize that it's no longer sufficient for businesses to focus solely on financial performance. The corporate landscape is evolving and a paradigm shift is underway. So there enters sustainability reporting, which is the indispensable tool that goes beyond traditional financial reporting, shining a light on a company's environmental, social, and governance, or your ESG practices. The urgency to address these challenges has never been greater. And as we strive for a sustainable future, a standardized disclosure framework becomes crucial to effectively communicate and measure sustainability performance. However, navigating through the current sustainability reporting landscape can be overwhelming, often resembling a perplexing alphabet soup with a myriad of acronyms and frameworks that are floating around. Sustainability reporting is all about understanding and communicating the impact that organizations have on the environment and society. It helps companies share information about their efforts to be environmentally friendly, socially responsible, and economically viable. Now, when we talk about the alphabet soup, we're referring to different reporting frameworks or standards that organizations can use to share this information. These frameworks are the guidelines that help them organize and present their sustainability performance in a consistent way. Currently, international efforts are being pursued to address the challenges arising from the fragmented landscape of sustainability reporting. And in this context, several bodies have emerged as key players, contributing to and shaping the sustainability reporting landscape. So this presentation really aims to shed light on the leading players and delve into the transformative progress of the emerging ESRS, ISSB, and SEC in shaping the future of sustainability reporting. Now, the decision to focus on the ESRS, ISSB, and SEC is because they are arguably amongst the most influential bodies in the field of sustainability reporting at present. The ESRS is the official sustainability reporting standard for the EU. The ISSB is a global standard setter for sustainability reporting, and the SEC is a securities regulator for the United States, which has proposed new rules that would require certain companies to report on their sustainability performance. So more specifically, we'll be taking a bit of a deep dive into the environmental disclosure standards that have emerged from these respective bodies. Now, why have we chosen this particular focus? Well, first and foremost, the environment is currently facing an unprecedented crisis. Climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, and GHG emissions are all pressing issues that demand urgent action. As concerned global citizens, it is essential that we understand the impact of corporate activities on the environment and have access to this reliable information. Secondly, the choice to focus specifically on the environmental category of ESG further stems from the limited progress observed from the ISSB and the SEC regarding disclosure requirements and standards pertaining to the social and governance factors of ESG. Thus, by focusing on environmental disclosure standards, we can establish a foundation for comparative analysis. By examining the environmental disclosure requirements set by these three bodies, we can identify similarities and gaps in the metrics and reporting frameworks. So this analysis allows us to assess the common metrics and disclosure requirements shared by these three bodies, highlighting areas of overlap and reporting framework similarities. And this knowledge really positions us to advocate for improved transparency, comparability, and standardization in ESG reporting, ultimately contributing to the advancement of sustainable and responsible business practices. So then the last bit of the discussion will then allow us to focus on the way forward and practical implications of sustainability reporting. In other words, what will reporting under these standards look like, or what will they tell us? We'll explore the future of categorization and standardization, and I think more importantly to reward value, how to leverage this information for our own research or for the development of tooling. Tooling to support corporations in making a full assessment of their purpose to pay alignment and to install remuneration practices that serve long-term value creation. So moving on to the next slide, let us just take a quick look into the development and progress of the ESRS sustainability standards. So the European Sustainability Reporting Standards are a set of standards that are being developed to support the CSRD. Now, the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, is a new EU directive that have made it mandatory for large and listed companies in the EU to report on their sustainability performance. So the ESRS provides the framework for this reporting, and they are really designed to make sustainability reporting more consistent, comparable, and reliable across the EU, to help companies identify and report on their material sustainability risks and opportunities, and of course, to provide investors and other stakeholders with the information that they need to make informed decisions about companies, and last but not least, to promote sustainable business practices across the EU. So these standards are in their very final stages of development and are expected to be finalized very soon. Once they are finalized, they will be adopted by the European Commission and will become the official sustainability reporting standards for the EU. So it's important to note that the central CSRD concept is double materiality. So a sustainability matter is therefore considered material when it meets the criteria defined for impact materiality, or for financial materiality, or for both. Companies must determine which information, such as which standard, disclosure requirement, or data point, is to be considered material based on their materiality assessment. Previously, the EFRAG drafts had mandatory disclosures independent of any materiality assessment, such as all climate-related disclosures. However, now, except for ESRS 2, these are no longer required if not material. In cases where topics or impacts aren't covered in full by the ESRS, utilizing GRI reporting will enable businesses to fill the gap in order to comply with disclosure requirements. Now, this really flows into the next question. What does the ESRS and the CSRD mean for the relevance of the GRI standards in Europe? So as confirmed by EFRAG, the ESRS are, as much as possible, fully aligned with the GRI standards. And this really sends a clear signal to established GRI reporters that they are well prepared for the ESRS and can leverage their existing reporting processes. For companies operating in the EU marketplace, the CSRD really reinforces and increases the relevance of the GRI standards. Most larger companies in the EU and elsewhere already report with the GRI and will be reassured that their current GRI-based reporting practices should best prepare them for the ESRS. The topics and requirements in the ESRS will be expanded over time, so using the GRI standards means companies can be ready to comply with future requirements. Of course, there will be some differences between the GRI's impact-focused global standards and the double materiality-focused EU standards as prescribed by the CSRD. However, as EFRAG has stated, where possible, the ESRS are fully aligned with the GRI. If, due to the content of the CSRD mandates, this can't be achieved, then they are as closely aligned with the GRI as possible. So, to better understand how the ESRS works, let's take a quick look at its architecture. Comprising 12 standards, this set of standards includes both cross-cutting, as you can see in your ESRS 1 and ESRS 2, and topical standards, which is your environment, social, and governance topical standards. In addition, the ESRS's architecture foresees the publication of sector-specific standards and standards for SMEs to be released in the second half of this year, 2023. ESRS 1 contains no disclosure requirements and sets out the general requirements that companies shall comply with when preparing and presenting sustainability-related information. The overall architecture of the first set of ESRS is really designed to ensure that sustainability information is reported in a carefully articulated manner and is based on a four-pillar structure which is outlined within ESRS 2. So ESRS 2 determines that the disclosure requirements in your topical ESG should cover the following four reporting areas. Your governance, which is the governance processes, controls, and procedures used to monitor and manage your impacts, risks, and opportunities. You then get your strategy, which is really how the undertaking strategy and business models interact with its material impacts, risks, and opportunities, including the strategy for addressing them. You get the category of risk management, which is the processes by which your impacts, risks, and opportunities are identified, assessed, and managed through policies and actions. And last but not least, you get your metrics and targets, which is how the undertaking measures its performance, including progress towards the targets it has set. And this is what the primary focus of our research has been in terms of comparing the environmental disclosure requirements of the three bodies. And this four-pillar structure really mimics that as set out by the TCFD, and is a structure that has also been adopted by the ISSB and SEC. The TCFD framework has been a benchmark for climate-related financial risk disclosures, and its recommendations are widely adopted by many entities. So looking specifically at the ESRS's environmental topical standard, it outlines disclosure requirements for companies to report on matters related to climate change, pollution, water and marine resources, biodiversity and ecosystems, and resource use and circular economy. So in addition to the general objectives, the draft environmental standards aims to enable users of sustainability statements to really understand the plans and capacity of a company to adapt its business model and operations in line with the transition to a sustainable economy, and how it contributes to the various environmental objectives of the European Green Deal, as well as to other EU strategic and regulatory frameworks in this context, such as the ever-complicated EU taxonomy. Now, to put it simply, the EU taxonomy provides a classification system for environmentally sustainable economic activities. This classification system is used to assess whether an economic activity is environmentally sustainable. So the ESRS requires companies to report on their alignment with the EU taxonomy. This means that companies must report on whether their economic activities are classified as environmentally sustainable under the EU taxonomy. And as we can see here, the structure and topics of the environmental standards of the ESRS are very much aligned with the EU taxonomy's objectives. So moving on to the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, let us discuss the development of their sustainability reporting standards. So in March of 2022 last year, the ISSB released its first two exposure drafts on IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, your S1 and your S2. The ISSB standards are intended to provide a comprehensive global baseline of sustainability disclosures, and these are designed to meet the information needs of investors. These were officially released on the 26th of June last month, 2023. So the information required in these sustainability standards is to really enable investors to understand that the performance of a company is closely linked to how it works with and serves as stakeholders in the community, and how it operates in society and the natural resources that it draws upon. It enables companies to explain to investors how those sustainability-related impacts, risks, and opportunities can affect a company's long-term performance and prospects. So foundationally, the ISSB has built on concepts in the Integrated Reporting Framework and SASB to describe this notion of sustainability. Now, the ISSB has jurisdictional working groups in place, including Europe, China, UK, the US, Japan, and the International Securities Regulators, IOSCO, as observer, to ensure that the building of a global baseline is accepted by jurisdictions and to further ensure interoperability. The ISSB has positive signals for adoption of its standards, and a global baseline has strong support for international comparability. Now, as I mentioned, on the 26th of June 2023, the ISSB were able to issue their first two sustainability disclosure standards, one on general requirements and one on climate-related risks and opportunities specifically. So let us take a quick look at them individually. Now, S1 is your general requirement standards, which really sets the framework for this global baseline of disclosures that I was talking about. It does that by proposing that companies be required to provide information on all their significant sustainability risks and opportunities when that information is necessary to assess enterprise value. And by that, we mean the information that investors need to make assessments of the value of a company's shares and net debt. So their focus is on material information being that which could reasonably affect investment decisions. In other words, the ISSB has a financial materiality approach. Now, sometimes when we talk about meeting investor needs, people think that that means the board is focused on a narrow set of information. And the ISSB has emphasized that that's not the case. So their particular scope of work includes information about the impacts of people, the planet, and the economy where that would affect enterprise value. Importantly, while the ISSB has only released specific climate-related requirements, which is in S2, which I'll touch upon shortly, in the General Requirements S1 document, the ISSB explains to companies how to meet this need to report on all significant sustainability risks and opportunities. And what S1 tells them to do is to identify what subjects to report on and the information to disclose, and to use the materials of the SASB and the Climate Disclosure Standards Board. The reason why in particular they focus on those materials, is that part of the formation of the ISSB has been consolidating with the CDSB and the Value Reporting Foundation, which brings with it the SASB standards plus other materials. So moving on to the climate-related disclosures, which is your S2 document. If a company utilizing the ISSB standards identifies climate-related risks and opportunities as a significant sustainability risk, then they turn to this climate document to look at the specific disclosures that they should provide. A lot of what is in this climate standard is intentionally built on the work that others have done, including the TCFD and SASB. And similar to the ESRS, as we can see here, the climate document asks for information arranged by governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. This has also been taken from the TCFD recommendations. So this synergy and architecture is a positive step that allows the ESRS and ISSB to contribute to creating further consistency, comparability, and reliability when it comes to your sustainability reporting. So just really to reiterate where we're at the moment, we know that the ESRS has 5 topics under their environmental category of sustainability. Their first one is specifically targeted at disclosure requirements for climate change. And while the ISSB recommends the use of SASB standards for other sustainability-related disclosures, they have not yet produced ISSB-specific documents pertaining to the disclosure of other environmental categories like the ESRS has done. So the ISSB has confirmed that projects are underway whereby the development of these additional environmental standards are in the pipeline. However, this is only to be expected within the medium to long term. So in line with the ISSB and the ESRS is the SEC, which is the US Securities and Exchange Commission. And the SEC issued a proposed rule in March last year that would enhance and standardize the climate-related disclosures provided by public companies. So in the proposing release, the SEC noted that the disclosures registrants would be required to provide are similar to those that companies provide under existing disclosure frameworks and standards, such as the TCFD and Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And similar to the ISSB, this proposal really focuses only on climate-related disclosures with an investor financial materiality focus. So this is why much of our research has been analyzing and comparing the climate-related disclosure requirements of these three bodies. There is commonality among each of the proposals and standards issued, including that of the TCFD framework, forming a shared input. However, there are also areas where they are not aligned, which may create practical challenges for companies trying to design coherent and consistent reporting that meets the needs of both global investors as well as jurisdictional requirements. The proposals and issued standards are ambitious and would have a significant impact on companies. For multinationals and others needing to apply multiple frameworks, the challenges would be magnified if the requirements are not compatible. So a key practical consideration would, for example, be aligning calculation methodologies or minimizing the different data requirements. Achieving a global baseline would really support companies in applying the standards, as well as driving consistent reporting across jurisdictions, reporting that is internationally comparable but also meets local needs. So assessing these climate standards provides a great example of the need for convergence, because the obvious question to ask is, are we going to get a global standard for climate-related reporting if three different organizations have issued proposals and official releases? So the good news is that all three bodies do have a lot more in common than different. The foundation for broad commonality really relies on the fact that the framework developed by the TCFD is foundational for all three bodies. All three build on the widely used GHG protocol as well, but nevertheless, the three climate frameworks have their own specificities and requirements, which will create differences in reporting practices. And we have attempted to provide an overall structural breakdown of the key climate-related metrics and targets used across all three organizations. However, this is simply not as easy as one would expect. At a glance, each of the proposed standards has certain requirements on specific aspects. However, when considered together, the result is that the most stringent requirement would have to be applied. During our research at Reward Value, we have been looking at how each of these organizations differ with regards to their climate-related disclosure requirements, and we have really been working on the categorization of these standards, where it can be noted that each high-level metric can further be divided into additional metrics. But let us look at the example on the disclosure requirements for GHG Scope 3 emissions. So here we can see there are evidently notable differences for Scope 3 disclosure requirements. And as we know, your GHG Scope 3 emissions are emissions throughout the company's value chain, both upstream and downstream. These are much more difficult to measure. In general, investors want them, while companies are concerned about their ability to generate accurate Scope 3 information, as well as the cost of doing so. So the SEC's requirement is the most parsimonious, only requiring Scope 3 disclosures if financially material or where a company has set Scope 3 reduction targets. Companies reporting under the ISSB framework are required to disclose such information without being provided any guidelines such as the use of thresholds or materiality assessments. Companies reporting under the ESRS framework are required to disclose such information subject to a materiality assessment. And the EU Commission's recent consultation on a delegated act has introduced phase-in provisions whereby special relief has been introduced for companies with less than 750 employees, whereby data points on Scope 3 and total GHG emissions may be emitted for the first reporting year. So we can see here that the ESRS's E1 is more prescriptive and provides guidelines on how frequently Scope 3 inventory should be performed and how it should be disclosed. Only material categories of Scope 3 GHG emissions based on the GHG protocol. So if a company is concurrently listed in a territory that adopts ISSB standards word by word, then it will be bound to disclose Scope 3 GHG emissions information, even though that disclosure may not be required by the SEC proposal or by ESRS E1. And given most jurisdictions' listings rules would require companies with multiple listings to provide the same information across different filings, this means that Scope 3 GHG emissions disclosures would need to be included in the SEC filings and in the EU sustainability reporting. So the key differences between these standards really relate to what information is considered relevant or material. We know that the ISSB focuses on financial materiality, and this lens proves particularly close to the SEC's investor-driven approach. The ESRS, however, explicitly integrates the impact of companies' activities or impact materiality, which is enshrined in the EU law by the CSRD. Considering the different approaches taken, these standards are unlikely to be fully interoperable from the get-go. However, efforts towards maximized levels of interoperability are fortunately being made. For example, the ISSB has set out a potential route forward to the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board that would support companies wishing to apply both the ISSB and ESRS standards together. It centers around identifying a common area of intersection. In other words, a subset of the requirements that would be aligned sufficiently, such as that applying one standard would satisfy the other. The ISSB and EU bodies are collaborating to create an interoperability mapping table to highlight this layer of intersection. The key challenge here is to maximize the content in the intersection and avoid having similar requirements that are excluded from the intersection because they are subtly different. In its October 2022 board meeting last year, the ISSB indicated the direction of its standard setting to EFRAG and supported expanding this area of intersection. Its decisions were accelerated to give EFRAG certainty before EFRAG updated its draft standards in November 2022. So in the updated draft ESRS standards released in November, EFRAG has made key changes to support this interoperability compared to their earlier versions. This includes aligning to a greater extent with the ISSB on concepts of financial materiality and value chain, content of cross-cutting disclosure requirements, the architecture of its standards, such as the use of the TCFD framework, and introducing disclosures included in the then proposed ISSB S2. So the European Commission states that it has engaged closely with the ISSB and the GRI to ensure a high degree of interoperability with the ESRS. And further modifications to the draft ESRS have been made in light of that engagement. And now that the final IFRS S1 and S2 documents have been released, a detailed analysis of interoperability can be soon expected to identify to what extent duplication in reporting is avoided. What we know now for certain is that the ESRS is referenced in the final ISSB standards as a source of guidance on matters where a specific ISSB standard is absent. The key point is that great progress is being made in developing a global baseline for climate-related disclosures. And this bodes well for standards for other sustainability issues. Ideally, in the mid to long term, we will have a solid set of sustainability reporting standards on which high quality assurance can be done, just as we have for financial reporting. Today, it's hard to imagine a world without required financial reporting based on a set of standards about a company's financial performance. Another vision is that 10 years from now, it will be hard to imagine a world without the same being true for a company's sustainability performance. And with that in mind, the key question is right now, how can we leverage information that is available now for our own research or for the development of tooling, as I referred to earlier? Similar to many academic studies, applying a content analysis would really serve as a valuable tool for unraveling new information that is yet to be explored by previous researchers. By subjecting these standards to systematic analysis, researchers can gain insights into the extent and quality of climate-related reporting. So this approach really involves grouping disclosure standards into broader categories based on common themes or content areas, streamlining data collection, analysis, benchmarking, and thus facilitating future research. By employing such categorization, researchers can efficiently identify patterns, trends, and gaps in climate-related disclosure practices, especially across different industries or geographical regions, really enabling a more targeted and comprehensive investigation for research purposes. So ultimately, this could empower us to generate valuable knowledge that would prove useful for the development of, for example, a remuneration assessment tool. Now, we need to look at what sets a good foundation upon which to form this high level of categorization. Based on the premise that all three organizations are highly aligned with the TCFD framework and similar to recent academic studies, utilizing this widely accepted TCFD framework provides a really strong foundation for us to use in establishing a set of standard or common climate-related disclosure categories. In particular, it's really of interest to focus on the metrics and targets, as these should inform and be informed by the organization's governance, strategy, and risk management processes. Metrics and targets really create a feedback loop over time in the same way that other KPIs and key risk indicators are used to inform business management processes. And as a result, these metrics and targets provide the connective tissue between the other TCFD recommendations and an organization's disclosure of its climate-related plans, performance, and position. Metrics and targets have 6 fundamental principles that are particularly important for climate-related metrics, in that they are decision useful, understandable, verifiable, objective, importantly trackable over time, and also aligned to the other 3 TCFD pillars. And this table provides a summary of the proposed types of information organizations should disclose and has noted the most common units of measure. Considering the fact that materiality is not a static concept, it is the TCFD's view that these cross-industry climate-related metrics, particularly GHG emissions, are key to understanding climate-related risks and opportunities, both by users assessing individual companies, those aggregating risks across companies within their investing, lending, or underwriting portfolio, as well as by regulators looking to assess systemic risk. And as discussed previously, there are multiple ways to measure and disclose metrics and targets, and different jurisdictions or industries may follow different best practices. For example, some organizations reporting amounts of executive remuneration impacted by climate consideration notes a percentage of the executive pay, while others discuss weighting factors or total amounts of compensation that could be impacted. The TCFD believes that these differences in units of measure help provide organizations with flexibility and do not impact comparability as long as units are clearly stated. So the cross-industry climate-related metrics not only improve comparability across companies, but are also key inputs with which to estimate your important climate-related financial impacts. So by assessing these cross-industry metrics, we can really determine, or rather assume, materiality topics that matter most in terms of its relevance and impact. This figure that you can see here illustrates how cross-industry climate-related metrics inform estimation of climate-related financial impacts. For example, calculating your scope 1, 2, and 3 GHG emissions and carbon prices can inform the company's cost-benefit analysis of potential investments and process changes or investments, while scenario analysis for plausible future emissions pathways and implied carbon prices can allow for a range of estimates on forward-looking carbon costs. So when organizations select metrics, they should consider whether there is an associated target against which to track progress. These targets typically have a numerical value assigned, which is specific and concrete, that provides the steps needed to accomplish a goal and are thus aligned with the intended outcomes and deadlines of larger goals. For example, an organization may set a goal to increase the proportion of their facilities upgraded against extreme heat. Climate-related targets supporting that goal may specify that 30% of facilities be upgraded by 2025 and 50% by 2030. As individuals and teams within the organizations reach their targets, the organization makes progress towards their bigger goals. Though not all metrics will require a target, all targets should be supported by appropriate metrics. So by designing a unique content analysis from the prescribed set of high-level metrics and targets, this would allow us to really mimic the approach that financial institutions use in the construction of their portfolio alignment tools. For example, financial institutions can capture a binary categorization of the number of companies with and without GHG reduction targets, for example, net zero. Others may choose to use a benchmarking divergence model, which measures forward-looking performance against normative benchmarks. For example, does it align with global goals? And this will allow us to determine tangible measures that have been taken by corporations in their climate-related target setting efforts, and allows us to form an assessment criteria to assess short-term and long-term incentive performance metrics. So the design of a content analysis using these high-level metric categorizations of climate-related standards can really significantly contribute to and align with the principles of responsible remuneration that are used to design the remuneration assessment tooling. By analyzing the categorization of climate-related disclosure standards, we can effectively assess a corporation's alignment with its stated purpose, values, and strategy. This analysis allows us to evaluate the tangible measures taken by corporations in their climate-related target setting efforts and their impact on financial and environmental performance. Additionally, the assessment of targets related to material topics helps identify the areas with the greatest potential for impact and value creation. By incorporating long-term value creation and sustainability into the remuneration plan, we can assess whether the timeframes and performance periods are aligned with the company's strategic objectives and global goals. The task requires dedicated efforts to analyze these high-level metrics, assess alignment with purpose and strategy, evaluate targets for impact, consider timeframes through the evaluation of transparent climate-related environmental disclosures. With careful planning and collaboration, we aim to develop a framework that aligns remuneration practices with corporations' purpose, values, and long-term value creation with respect to their environmental performance. Analyzing the climate-related disclosure standards within the topical environmental category is a step towards leveraging the information we need to develop an all-encompassing remuneration assessment tool that, in the end, would ideally consider all aspects of non-financial performance metrics. So in conclusion, the analysis of climate-related standards plays a vital role within the broader scope of environmental reporting, which in turn falls within the encompassing role of non-financial reporting. By diligently assessing these standards, we can effectively evaluate the long-term value creation of corporations and align it with appropriate executive remuneration assessment practices. This approach ensures that remuneration strategies do not merely focus on short-term financial gains, but rather prioritize long-term sustainability. By integrating environmental considerations into reporting and remuneration frameworks, we really can foster responsible business practices, drive positive impact, and create enduring value for both corporations and the environment. Thank you very much.